Hello everyone. Today we're going to build an application with a Ryax backend and a Bubble frontend. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go to the repository we built for this specific integration. So if you click on the link in the description, you'll be able to access four different actions for this specific thing. The other thing I opened in my tabs is a new Bubble app page. So I'm going to head back to Ryax and log in. The first thing we're going to do in Ryax is head to the library part of the app and build the different modules we will need for this demo, for this example. So I'm going to create a new repository connection, go back to the GitLab repository we provide and copy the URL. You need to check that the URL ends with git.git to be a valid URL. Then you click on the new repository you just created and you scan the main branch. This is the default branch for GitLab repositories. And you end up with a list of the four modules that we've seen earlier. They are ready to build. They are scanned successfully, so I'm going to build them one by one. And they will start building right away. We'll be then able to check that they've built properly in the interface and head back to our backend workflow in Ryax to start building our backend. So I'm going to create a new workflow now. We'll just choose the first trigger. The first trigger of our workflow will be an API that is able to access AWS S3. The second step of our workflow will be to transform images from this input. Then we'll access the Bubble API to interact with Bubble, and then we'll upload back the result image onto an AWS S3. So let's go back to the first step of our workflow. The first step is the trigger, the one that's going to start the workflow. Let's fill all the required information with our access keys for AWS S3, the bucket name, and the prefix. So as for the prefix, you can just take the URL of the Ryax instance you're connected to. Then we'll set up the second step. The second step is a simple image transform module where we link uploaded images from the previous step and we apply three kinds of transformations. We'll choose grayscale for the moment, but we have also resize function or rotate function. Then we'll set up the Bubble API module. We'll input the image, the transformed image from the previous step into Bubble. And here in the Bubble URL, we need to paste the URL of our app, which we will create just next. Last step is about uploading back the result images to S3. For this, we can do a very simple thing. We can use the link function to link the same parameters of the first S3 step, because we're using the same bucket, the same access keys, and we will be using for this last step the done folder name that exists on our bucket, in which we will output all the result images, and we won't use any timestamp for now. So let's go to Bubble now. We'll create a new app that's called Ryax-Bubble, but any name is okay. Make note of the URL of the Bubble app, because we're going to use it back in the Ryax workflow. So in Bubble now, we need to set up a few plugins. We'll start first with the API plugin, so that we can connect Ryax and Bubble together. So we'll install the API connector. We'll create a new API for Ryax. Here we go. We'll also create a new call. So the first call we're going to create is a call onto a folder on our S3 to list the content of the folder. This folder is called to do because it means that it's the folder that we will place the images to when they are uploaded by the user. So for the API URL, you can head back to Ryax and go back to the dashboard, and you have, for each project in Ryax, you have a base URL that provides the first part of the URL as the API comes. You then need to add on top of this URL the endpoint of your specific workflow you're working with. So you can find it in two ways, either on the dashboard view or in the edit view on the first trigger of your workflow, and you add slash and you paste this endpoint at the end of the URL. Then we'll do another slash list slash to do slash list to list the content of the to do folder, and we'll initialize the API. So we end up with a 404 code. The API was not found, and that's perfectly understandable because we haven't started the Ryax workflow yet. So we're going back to Ryax. We need to set up one last step in the Bubble connector, and that's the URL of the Bubble app. So I'm just pasting the URL I just copied earlier when I created my app, and I'm adding a little bit of suffixes to this URL. These are all the same for first Bubble app that you create from scratch, so you can use the same suffixes here. And then I'm hitting deploy. So the Ryax backend workflow will start deploying, which means it will enter a ready state where it can start triggers. It can be triggered by something. So let's go back to Bubble and initialize the code again. Okay, so this time we end up with a valid output. We have return values from the API, so it means it's working, and it finds one images here. We get the image name and the image URL, so it means it's working. So Bubble is mapping this first information properly. So let's head to the design page. We'll create a repeating group frame right here. We don't need a specific number of rows, so we will just uncheck this. And then we need as a source and a type of content to input what we've just connected with our API. So I'm going to do that right now. Okay, we just find the Ryax API we just set up earlier. Now in each row of the group I'm going to want to display the images. So I'm dropping an image object into this, and I'm linking them to the information that is output from our API calls. The other thing we can do is also display the image name, so dropping a text field right next to the image frame, and we also link this information to the API outputs. Okay, so now we're ready to list the contents of the to-do folder on our S3 with this call. So let's just preview the app, refresh the page, and here we go. We have one image right now in the to-do folder on our S3, and it's working properly. The API is connected, information is read properly, so we can move on. The next step is to also read the done folder. So we have two folders on our S3, one to do for the images that have been uploaded by our user, and one done folder where the images will end up after they've been processed by our workflow. So we take the same URL as before, we just change the suffix from list to do to list done, and then we initialize the call, and we have information here, so that's perfect. Same process as before, we'll create a repeating group, populate it with images frames on the right, on the left, and text frames for the image names on the right, with the information coming from the same API but from the done list call. Let's call it that way. So on the left part of our page, we'll have the images that have been flagged as to do, so they need to be processed by the backend system, and on the right we'll have the result of this processing. So I'm finishing up configuration. Should be quite quick, and we'll check with the preview right next if we actually read the contents of the done folder on RS3, and it's worked. So this one images was already uploaded, and the result was already uploaded on RS3. So we see already the before and after of one image that was already existing. So far we haven't input new images yet. So how do we do that? So next step is to create an upload field, so we can actually upload a set of images into a workflow. So I'll drop an HTML frame right here. We'll set it up as a multiple input field. So input type will be file. I'm gonna give it an ID that we'll use just next in a JavaScript call linked to a button. So to get this idea, you can go back to our repository and find the snippet, the JavaScript snippet that we're going to use for the button. So the idea is file to upload. We'll go back to that later. And we set up a type as multiple to be able to upload multiple files at the same time. Okay, so now we have our upload field. It's not yet linked to any action, so it means that it doesn't work, it doesn't do anything aside from accepting files. So we create a send button that's going to actively trigger the backend workflow from the Ryax side. And we're going to link this send button with some JavaScript code to enable the call and to actually trigger the backend workflow. So for this, we'll need a new plugin. It's called Toolbox. It allows for JavaScripting, so we'll install it and we're going to link it to an event. So we go to the workflow section of Bubble. Good practice is to also start with the first event ever, which is when the page is loaded, and then we'll set up another event when the button send is clicked, and then we'll add our JavaScript execution here. Let's go back to the repository we found just before. We have a very small JavaScript bit of code here that allows for workflow triggering upon a button click. So that's what we're going to do. At the end of the code, you'll see that there is a file to upload ID, the one that we've given to our send button. And at the top, you have a URL that you need to change based on yours. So you use the exactly same URL base as we've used with the API URL with a suffix. We'll just change the suffix to list. To do, and here we go. So now we refresh the preview. We are trying now to upload a specific color image here. We'll click send. So it's a very basic front end for now. So we don't have any information feedback saying that it was successfully sent, but that's something we can do later. And if we go back to Ryax, we see that it triggered a new execution, a new run with the image we've input in the front end page. So we'll download the image after transformation to check that everything was processed properly, and then we'll head back to Bubble and see if it was properly reflected in the front end, on the front end part. So you see that the steps are propagating right now. It's still at the Bubble stage and moving on to the S3 stage. So yeah, the output of the processing module was successful. It's black and white, it was color before, and now we can refresh the front end page and see if it worked properly. And here we go. So we have the pie chart color on the left and black and white on the right. So everything works properly. It's very simple for now, but within a few minutes we've been able to implement a full front end page with a full backend working in the back, all linked together, so you can exploit the main benefits of Bubbles as well as the main benefits of Ryax at the same time working together. So that's quite nice. So yeah, we just set up a new execution with 3 new images. You can observe that these executions went way faster. It's just because it's the first execution actually instantiates the function, so the next ones are way faster, and the next ones as well. So here I changed the transform function from grayscale to rotate, and we're gonna input new images. It will create one execution per image because it's one processing line per image. Every image needs to go through the same steps, so it creates different executions for each image, and that enables you to trace every image that was input to the workflow. And now instead of grayscale, we've got this rotating function where we rotate 45 degrees. So we see that it was successful here. So now what we can do is maybe try to add a few functions to our page. We'll add a refresh function for now. And we'll also try to stylize the page a little bit to give it a bit of a brand spirit. So to refresh, we'll create a new event in the workflow page of Bubble, and we'll simply assign the refresh button to a refresh page function. So that's as simple as that, but it enables easier page refreshing for the user instead of having to actually refresh from the browser. Okay, so now the refresh button works. Last thing we can do is try to stylize the page a little bit, so change the button's colors, add a banner at the top, add some text explaining what the tool does. So I'm going to create a new button style that's closer to the brand I want to display. So I'll change the color, add a different color to the buttons. Working with styles is very handy because it allows you to change a lot of different frames at once. It's quite easy. So now my buttons are a little more refined, related to my brand, and let's resize them a bit. And next step is to add a banner. So I'm going to add a banner at the top with my logo. Just getting a logo from my local folders, and then we'll move on to text. So let's place the buttons down a little bit to make some room for the explanation texts that will be very useful for our users. Text here, and I'm going to write some very simple instructions, just explaining what the tool does. So once we've done that, we can go back to the preview and check out our page. And what we realize that we've built in a few minutes quite a nice page, all using low-code systems on the backend side and the front-end side, so working together to provide a quite easy experience and be able to go fast with very little code. So thank you for tuning in, and let's stay in touch for the next